Welcome to CineMike. For this episode, I'm going to discuss and rank what I think are the best and worst things about Season 7 of Game of Thrones. Well everyone, we did it. We are one season closer to the end of this story, so the pressure is on to start paying off a lot of the things that were set up throughout the series. Some of the fans have expressed concern if they can pull this off. The biggest reason being that the show has run out of source material to adapt, which gives the writers the challenge of trying to finish George R.R. Martin's beloved epic. Did they pull it off this season? Well, it depends on who you ask, because I've seen passionate arguments for both answers. The writers appear to focus on delivering fan service moments to provide what is generally expected from the fantasy genre. Our favorite characters coming together, joining forces, some of them reuniting after many episodes while some are meeting each other for the first time. We also start to see a lot of these separate storylines colliding together. The story follows the start of the war between Daenerys Targaryen and Cersei Lannister for the Iron Throne. But Jon Snow is about to show them the greater threat, the army of White Walkers. This sounds like good stuff, but to some fans, it's providing what's expected that's the issue, because the show's greatest strength is usually how it doesn't play it safe. I find myself seeing both sides of the argument, which is why I wanted to cover what I liked and disliked about this season. So I've selected and ranked in order my top 5 best and worst things. This 7-episode season was the shortest one yet, and so there was a lot of developments that were jam-packed in there to choose from. I'm going to start off with the best, because ultimately, I do feel more positive about this season than negative. So starting at the bottom of my top 5 best things. At number 5, the Night King brings down the wall. The most important parts to a story is how it begins and how it ends. Now, while this isn't the ending to the series, this is the last impression that we are left off with until the final season begins. And wow, what a moment to leave us off with. Just after we found out that Tyrion was unsuccessful to convince Cersei to join the fight against the White Walkers, now we see the Sacred Wall, the one thing standing between all of Westeros and the White Walkers, get blown to pieces. And by Daenerys' deceased dragon Viserion, resurrected and twisted by the Night King into an instrument of war upon the living. A weapon against what his former master holds dear. As the army of White Walkers crosses over, things are looking really grim. This was a great ending, but I chose to place it at the bottom of the list since it's a pretty brief moment in comparison to my other choices. In number 4, the Frozen Lake. This was a badass team-up episode. It almost felt more like one of those classic World War II films where a group of commandos go behind enemy lines. It also had more of a Lord of the Rings adventure feel to it than other episodes. There was a dangerous quest that brings them all together. They have to journey across dangerous terrain, fight deadly creatures, and complete an objective that could save the world. It doesn't get much more classic Joseph Campbell than that. There was a lot of really fun interactions among all of them, like the Hound and Tommen. Really fun stuff. It all leads to them getting trapped on an island at the center of a frozen lake with a White Walker captive while the army of the dead surrounds them. Once the White Walkers cross over the frozen lake to attack them, it gets super intense. You're just counting the seconds, hoping that Daenerys will come to rescue them in time, but time keeps ticking on, and every moment you think that one of your favorite characters is about to die. Then Daenerys shows up in all of her dragon glory on top of Drogon, and they, along with her 2 other dragons, rain hellfire down on the White Walker army. There were some gaps in logic for how quickly Daenerys was able to rescue Jon and the gang, but I'll talk about that more later in my least favorite section. I did find it odd that Daenerys would bring all 3 of her dragons into the fight. You'd think that she'd want to keep some of them home and safe just in case things go bad. And as it turns out, that was a bit stupid on her part, because the Night King does seize the opportunity to throw an ice spear into her dragon Viserion, killing him. That is a pretty huge moment to see one of these endangered and magical creatures killed, and the huge loss that is to Daenerys, who views them as her children. An even bigger moment comes at the end of this episode, though, when we see the Night King turn the dead dragon into a White Walker. Wow. Just wow. That really changes the game, and it's sure to make the upcoming war all that much more dramatic and difficult to win. In my number 3 spot, the death of Littlefinger. I was honestly tempted to place this at first, just because of how satisfying it was to finally see it happen. Even though I bumped this down to number 3, I will still say that this definitely got the biggest smile out of me. Until this season's finale, I was considering adding Sansa to the things that I liked least about this season. The show actually did a pretty good job of making it seem as though Sansa was a total fool. First by having her be annoying as hell with questioning Jon's every order in front of everyone, then having her nag and complain the whole time, making it seem as though Littlefinger was managing to manipulate her despite her awareness that he's a snake. All of these things were pretty frustrating to sit through, but the payoff was massive, with Sansa ordering Littlefinger's execution. She completely and totally redeemed herself. It would have been easy to be fooled here. Littlefinger's scheme to turn Sansa against her sister Arya appeared to be working. The scene where Arya threatens to cut off Sansa's face made it seem as though this was a done deal. That was a great play by the writers because when Sansa turns her judgment from Arya onto Lord Baelish, Littlefinger, we could really feel his shock. To see every step in his plan go exactly as he wanted, I mean, he was pretty much the mastermind of all of the conflict in Westeros. And then to see in this scene all that backfire so incredibly was satisfying on the highest level. I understand that some people wanted to see him live further into the story and to see more of his plan play out. However, I felt that the entire season was building up to his downfall. It's just that he and many of us didn't realize it until it was too late for him. Everything that he had ever done, it all gets thrown in the fire under his feet. Seeing him beg on his knees in front of Ned Stark's children, it felt like true justice. I clapped and cheered when he died. Coming in number 2, Jon Snow and Daenerys. Well, they finally met, and the results were every bit as satisfying as fans had hoped. This was a team-up that was anticipated for a long time. Fire meets ice, dragon meets wolf. Jon and Daenerys' stories have run a bit parallel to each other since the beginning. Both came from positions of weakness. One a bastard, and the other a pawn by an older brother to get the Iron Throne. Both of them had to rise up to face challenges that made them strong and respected. Both have become almost messiah-like figures to their followers. It was such a huge moment when they first met each other. Seeing them grow from strangers into allies was a really enjoyable arc to watch this season, and there were so many great moments between them. Like when Jon was able to touch her dragon, which was a moment that she realized that Jon was not just an ordinary man. Then there was also the moment on the boat after Daenerys rescued Jon and his team from the frozen lake. He had retrieved a White Walker as proof of the army of the dead, and at the cost of one of her dragons. It was a very vulnerable moment between the two of them where Daenerys vows to help Jon fight the Night King, and Jon calls her his queen. They hold hands and lock eyes in a will they or won't they moment. The best romances always toys with you about when it will happen, and it finally does at the end of this season. Their relationship carries even more dramatic weight because of the reveal that Jon is not the bastard son of Ned Stark, but instead the legitimate son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Ned's sister, Lyanna Stark. This makes Daenerys his aunt, which adds a whole new level of complications to their developing romance. What does this mean between them? Will they continue their romance if they find out about their relation? Will Daenerys come to view Jon as a threat for her claim for the Iron Throne? As a fan, I feel weird saying this because I know this is incest, but at the same time, yeah, I want to see them work it out. As weird as that is to say, and judging by the fans' reactions to their hooking up, I'd say I'm not the only one. Now we've reached what I think is the best part from this season. Coming in at number 1, the Loot Train Attack. There were some great moments this season, but I was totally blown away by this battle. This sequence was amazing. Just when I thought that the show couldn't get any bigger than the Battle of the Bastards, they found a way to raise the bar. We've waited years to see Daenerys take her dragons into the fight against the Lannisters, and this did not disappoint. Everything here was top-notch. The effects team found a beautiful blend of practical effects with CGI. The pyrotechnics and mayhem was just jaw-dropping, with Drogon laying waste to the Lannister forces with explosive fire. As an impressive number of extras stumble around on fire, Bronn makes his way to the Scorpion and fires a shot into Drogon and wounds him. After Drogon does a pass and destroys the Scorpion with fire, Daenerys has him land so that she can tend to his wound. Unknown to her, Jaime sees this window of opportunity and charges at her on horseback. This moment was built up so well. Seeing both sides of the fight, there's moments where you're pumping your fist to Daenerys and Drogon laying waste to the enemy, but then finding yourself worried for Bronn and Jaime. In this final charge, I honestly was going back and forth about who I wanted to win here. I didn't want to see Drogon kill Jaime, but I also knew that Jaime couldn't succeed in killing Daenerys. That is some damn good storytelling right there. When you've invested the viewer so much into both sides, that they feel too conflicted to choose who to cheer for. It was an incredibly intense moment where it felt certain that we'd lose a beloved character. So, great battle. Great stuff. And now, I'm going to cover 3 honorable mentions that didn't quite make it into my best list. Arya has the honor of making it in here twice. Season 7 kicks off with finishing Arya's attack on the Freys by tricking all of the remaining ones to drink poisoned wine while wearing the face of Walder Frey. Considering how horrific the Red Wedding was, seeing scenes where Arya is just exterminating these backstabbers is pretty satisfying. I admit though that the Faceless God thing is a bit too undefined for me. Like, how does she take on the voice and height of whatever face she's wearing? I just don't totally get it, but I'm still glad to see that the Freys are all wiped out. Next up, I'm going to mention the moment where Arya spars with Brienne of Tarth. This was a really fun moment just to show everyone what her skill set has become. Having them remember the little girl that left home, and then seeing this badass that has returned years later after all this training, it was a pretty satisfying moment for her arc. There was also a pretty awesome moment in the season finale where you have all these characters coming together in King's Landing at the Dragon Pit to try and negotiate a temporary truce. Jon showing Cersei the White Walker and all of that. Her face, right? Good stuff. And finally, I'm going to mention Theon's path to redemption. The character was pretty frustrating this season to say the least, but the season ends by giving him a chance to make it right. True, the battle that raged on the sea from a surprise attack by Euron Greyjoy was impressive, but in terms of development, it was just damn disappointing to see Theon unable to save his sister Yara when she needed him the most. Just when we thought that Theon had grown and was on a path for redemption, he regresses back into a total coward. That said, however, the season ends with him changing in a way that feels more earned and final. You realize that the rescue of Sansa may not have been the true moment of empowerment for him. After all, part of that was also self-preservation. Inside, he was still scared and was also suffering from trauma. It was the moment with his sister's men on the beach where he demands that they save her against overwhelming odds that you truly see him changing for the better. With a nice pep talk from Jon to give him courage, Theon must fight one of his own men for the right to lead. He gets beaten repeatedly, but he won't stay down. His own well-being is finally the least important thing to him. The part where the guy tries to kick Theon in the nuts is a pretty good moment, seeing that weakness turned into a strength and Theon just smiling at him. And through perseverance, he wins the fight and takes charge of the men. He still has a long way to go to make up for his mistakes, but this was at least a start. Now onto what I think are the worst things about this season, and honestly, they weren't even that bad. They were more frustrating. In this section, my ranking will build towards what I think is the worst thing. So being at number 1 for this list is not a good thing. Coming in number 5, Alleria and the Sand Snakes. I was never really a fan of their storyline, to be honest. After the Viper was killed, they just were never able to invest me too much in this family. That said though, we did spend a lot of time seeing them try to avenge his death and punish the Lannisters, poisoning Jaime and Cersei's daughter Myrcella Lannister. They even went so far as to betray and murder Prince Doran Martell and his son Tristan. They were family, so that's extreme. When they joined with Daenerys, I assumed this was building up to something. Then it's all cut short after Euron Greyjoy's naval attack. 2 of the Sand Snakes are killed, while Alleria and her last remaining daughter are brought before Cersei. Cersei finds it justice to poison Alleria's daughter while forcing her to watch her die. And that appears to be the last time that we'll see them. I get the dramatic side to this moment, and it is a good moment for Cersei. It's just that it felt a bit rushed, and like the storyline didn't deliver on its build-up. It makes a lot of their scenes feel a bit pointless because in the end, they didn't contribute that much. In number 4, Jorah Mormont's quick recovery. He became infected with grayscale, which is a contagious disease of the flesh that hardens and cracks it, making it almost look like stone. It was a massive dramatic weight that had forced him to exile himself from Daenerys, the woman he loves. So this seemed like it was going to have a massive impact on his story that would involve a long journey to get back to her. Well, that turned out not really to be the case here. Samwell Tarly just so happens to be studying to be a maester at the Citadel that Jorah has taken refuge in. Sam decides to go against the orders of the Elders and perform a dangerous procedure that involves cutting away the skin infected with grayscale while applying a special ointment. Yeah, the process looked painful, but then Jorah is totally cured afterwards, and that's it. Problem solved, moving on. It was just way too quickly resolved than what it felt like the build-up demanded. It just felt like they rushed through that story to make time for other stories. I was happy to see that Jorah was cured and that he got back to Daenerys, but I just would have liked a bit more struggle and drama to get there. In number 3, Jaime Lannister. Now don't get me wrong, great character and he had some great moments this season. So let me explain why he places in here. He is arguably one of the characters who has changed the most throughout the series. He started off as more of a villain. He was a guy who would kill a kid if they got in the way, like when he pushed Bran out the window for discovering his incestual affair with his own sister. However, he began to change in the series, especially with his time spent with Brienne, and somehow has come out the other end of this whole thing a more honorable and likable man. That background made his story this season all the more frustrating. We all remember the hot tub confession scene between Jaime and Brienne, where he explained why he killed the Mad King, the horror he felt as the king expressed his wishes to burn them all with wildfire, how Jaime made the choice to betray and murder his king to spare the people of King's Landing from a terrible fate. Well, then skip ahead to the end of Season 6, with Cersei using wildfire to blow up the Great Sept, killing all inside and around the area, including Queen Marjorie, which led Cersei and Jaime's final living child, King Tommen, to kill himself. As Cersei is crowned queen, Jaime looks on at her with a stare that I thought conveyed shock at what she had done and dread at what she was becoming. And given his backstory, that would have made total sense. She actually did the very thing that he killed the Mad King to prevent. But then we go into Season 7, and it seems like he kind of brushes it away and acts like it didn't happen, or at least tries to pretend to. He says maybe one or two things to her, but that's it. He pretty much drops it, as though it wasn't really that big of a deal. I found that very frustrating. Now, I know that Cersei is pretty good at manipulating him, but you'd think that he'd be more horrified at her actions and feeling more of the loss of his last living child. True, he does eventually turn on her near the end of the season, but it feels more motivated by other things than this particular incident. So I'm glad that he finally turns on her, but it feels a bit hard to believe that her earlier actions weren't enough to call his loyalty into serious question. In number 2, Ed Sheeran's cameo. This is on the list for an obvious reason. Why? Just why? Now, I know that this upset the fans on varying levels. Some would list this as their worst moment, while others may not have minded this cameo at all. I think that I fall in the middle. I see the frustration. His inclusion felt very unnecessary and forced, almost as though they were promoting him in some way by having him sing around a campfire. The scene felt very constructed around giving a reason for his appearance. That said, I can also see how it may not be a huge deal. I mean, if you didn't know who he was, then wouldn't he just seem like another random Lannister soldier who just so happens to have a really good singing voice? I do agree that it was distracting and a bad idea to push his cameo in there. It really stands out from the rest of the things that are maybe not so great about this season, so that's why it kind of ranks high, but not all the way at the top. And now onto what I think is the worst thing about this season. In number 1, the pacing. One of the things that many fans have come to appreciate about the show is the time it takes to let narratives unfold. There are, after all, huge developments in the show, and those kind don't happen all the time. A lot of the pacing was carried over from the books by George R.R. Martin because his material is really long and dense. However, the show ran out of direct source material to adapt since he hasn't completed the books as of yet. So the showrunners have had to fill in the rest themselves. I'd say that Season 7 is where you really start to feel that. There is also the decision to cut the show's usual 10-episode season arc to only 7 episodes. This was probably mostly a financial reason, as less episodes allows them to put their budget into bigger and better action and effect sequences, and in that regard, I'd say they used the money very well. However, it did make the narrative feel a bit too rushed in places. A perfect example of this would be Episode 6 of this season, where Jon Snow takes a team over the wall to retrieve a White Walker. They become trapped on a lake and send Gendry to run to get help. While it appeared to take them over a day to get there, Gendry seems to run back to the wall within hours. Then he gets a raven out to Dragonstone, which sends Daenerys to come beyond the wall with her dragons for a rescue, and all this appears to happen in under a day. Back in the old days of the show, this kind of information and rescue would have taken much longer to happen. This felt very rushed and impossible. But the battle when she arrives is so impressive that it's hard to complain about it. But it's little details like this that the show used to put a lot of thought into, and that was lacking this season. This pace made certain moments feel not totally earned, and certain series of events feel off and unnatural. Like how Uncle Benjen was crammed in there at the end of the Frozen Lake battle to rescue Jon. He pops in the scene and then apparently dies, and it happens so fast that you wonder why they took the time to establish that he wasn't dead. Setting up his story that he's undead, neither a White Walker nor a living man? Why bother if this is how little you're going to use him? This again feels as though the writers were just trying to rush through his storyline to make time for other stories. It's moments like this where you see how a full 10-episode season really would have benefited this story. So that brings me to the end of my ranking. I'd say that I overall enjoyed this season once I reached the end of it. There were moments along the way that I questioned, but they were usually followed by some jaw-dropping stuff. There's just so many payoffs and situations that we the fans have been waiting to see, and it's sometimes easy to overlook any faults. It felt a lot like the show really wanted to please its fans this season, and that could be argued to be one of its faults. The show has never really catered to what would be pleasing to its fans. Actually, the opposite tends to be more the case. The show is known for challenging expectations, and that is part of what made it so addictive. Game of Thrones took a familiar genre that tends to follow a specific formula and twisted it on its head. You rarely felt at ease or safe while watching previous seasons. This season definitely felt more traditional and safe, so there is something lost there. That said, even though this may not be the best season, I still found myself enjoying it. It is jam-packed with some impressive moments. So I'm hoping that Season 8, the final season, will find more of a balance in its storytelling. Be amazing and epic, but also have writing throughout it that reflects the best of the series. Well everyone, I think that I covered everything that I wanted to, so if you enjoyed this video, then please click like. And also feel free to leave a comment below. Tell me if you agree or disagree. Tell me what your favorite or least favorite moment was from Season 7 of Game of Thrones. And also, I welcome you to subscribe to my channel. You can also follow me on Twitter at CineMike Nerd. So, anyways, until next time, this is Mike, signing off.